And so the primary thing I do first is just to recognize that that's the voice of not enough. And literally to me, he is a character in my life. We need more of the feminine, divine feminine. But I literally picture that like, oh, there he goes again. And I was talking to somebody earlier today, but I think what that does is it takes this thing that I think of as me, that voice inside my head that I think of as me, and I put it out there so that I understand, wait, this isn't me.
Welcome to the Self-Care Goddess podcast, where healing stories, practical self-care strategies, and science-backed tools to regulate stress, feel calm, grounded, and energized come together to help you reclaim your vitality. I'm your host, Rita Savoya, holistic nutritionist, trauma-informed breathwork coach, and founder of Breathwork Barista. This podcast is for women who are ready to restore their energy and radiance, reconnect with their bodies, reawaken their inner power, and redefine self-care as a way of being. Through science meets soul practices, restorative mind-body tools, and real stories of transformation, we'll explore how true well-being can help you live with more joy, vibrant health, and authentic connection to yourself and those you love. Take a deep breath in, let it go, and let's begin. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Self-Care Goddess podcast with today's theme, Stop Listening to the Voice of Not Enough. Can't wait to get into this podcast today, something we've talked about many times, but not really touched on it the way we're going to touch on it today. So before we start, as you know, let's walk the talk here on the Self-Care Goddess podcast and just give yourself a couple of moments to just tune in with your body. Allow the inhales to flow in through the nose, and let's sigh it out through the mouth. I invite you to breathe a little deeper, a little slower than usual, and just notice what you notice. Perhaps parts of your body feeling a little tension, a little stress. Could wiggle them around and just find a more comfortable position. You can channel the exhales to those areas to help soften and relax those tense muscles. Just give yourself these few moments of checking in. How are you doing? Stopping and pausing for just a few moments. Indulging in the pause from your hectic day. On your next inhale, I invite you to breathe into the area of the heart. Where attention goes, energy flows. So let's energize this beautiful organ that's keeping you alive. Expanding on the inhales and then letting go what no longer serves you on the exhales. And as you continue this heart-focused breathing, I invite you to visualize someone that you're grateful for today, living or past. It could also be a pet. See them standing right in front of you. Smile and let them know that you love them, you appreciate them, and you are so grateful. They have been walking this path with you. And now I invite you to turn this love, this gratitude, and this appreciation towards yourself. Energize every single cell of your body for being here, taking the time for self-care, and self-love. On your next inhale, slowly flutter your eyes open and come back to us. Thank you for participating in that quick coherence technique from the Heart Math Institute. So today, very interesting topic. I cannot wait to dive in. We have Barbara Burgess, is an author, mother, executive, and unapologetic dark chocolate lover. Yes, me too. Who's embraced the beautiful messiness of life. She founded Corluma, Core Heart, Luma Light, a Chicago-based consulting firm, wrote and performed a one-woman show, The Extraordinary Experience of Being Ordinary, and most recently wrote her first book, Enough, Finding Peace in a World of Distractions, Hustle, and Expectations. Known for her humor, vulnerability, and practical wisdom, Barbara shares simple shifts to help people remember they are enough and have enough. Her ego is kept in healthy check by 2 teenage children and career adventures that include selling candy bars for Nestle Foods, launching Granger into internet commerce, a brief marketing stint at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and most recently overseeing operations, marketing, and finance as the COO of a nonprofit. Like all of us, Barbara says she's still figuring it out. Wow, what an intro. Love it. How are you today, Barbara?
I'm doing beautifully. I mean, how could I be anything but with a start that has a heart math resonance to it?
Yes, yes, I love it too. And it gets me to coherence as well. So it's such a win-win. So tell us a little more. You have quite the bio, and I'm very, very interested in all of these things. But let's maybe focus a little bit more on your book and the inspiration behind Enough. And the reason why I'm so interested in this is because when I do a breathwork experience, so I'm a breathwork facilitator, but I'm also a breathwork integration coach. And when we really unpack what's going on, the most common core wound at its core, what everybody is feeling or experiencing is that they're not enough. So yeah, so this is like so interesting to me, and I really want to unpack that too. But what motivated you to write about the struggles of self-acceptance in today's like super fast, hectic, hustle, fast-paced world?
You know, I think I had told a friend this recently, but when I published the book, I realized that was the beginning of my journey and that it was for me. So I think in some ways, you know, this has been an inquiry for a long time. You know, I have done a lot of, you know, personal development, self-reflection, all the kinds of things, including breath work and a lot of the things that I love that you are so focused on supporting individuals on. But you know, even at that, it was kind of much more cognitive than it was embodied. And it wasn't until about 3 years ago when I left the job I had been in for 22 years that there was more space in my life for other things. And truly, this journey of, I literally in the book, I treat her as a character. Enough is a, you know, being an entity that came into my life, and not enough has his own, you know, character, energy, et cetera. And so what happened was I just began to experience a fuller sense of enough, right? Of something that, you know, I say, you know, reached out from my heart, almost with, you know, these tendrils to embrace me in these really unexpected small moments in life. And so as I was beginning to experience that, I feel like those stories began kind of writing themselves. And originally, I just started capturing it as sort of self-reflective journaling, and then it just turned into something more. And, you know, my personal philosophy is we're all always on this journey. That's why I say, you know, I'm not an expert in anything. I just have my own experiences. And so, you know, part of what I was called to do is sort of share that and express that through the book itself. But I agree with you. I think, you know, I do executive coaching for people. And although we don't work directly in the ways that you do from a body perspective, that is what's underneath it, right? We're looking at what are the limiting beliefs, what are the things that are in the way from a framework, and that sense of I'm not enough is so common and including a very high power, successful executives, people that folks would look at from the outside, look at their achievements and think, well, surely, you know, they feel like enough, but it's not true. And so to me, the book was an opportunity to share what the experiences were that I was having in case they might be helpful for other people. Because although I knew about the concept, for years, probably had understood it as a limiting belief, that's different than having an embodied experience of enough.
I love that. And yeah, so much to unpack. So you're my second guest today. I had two interviews. In the first interview, she also mentioned the word embodied, and I'm just like, it keeps coming up. So what is your definition of embodied? And when you say that you've had understood it or conceptually grasped and knew what you were talking about, what do you mean by you had that embodied experience?
Well, I'll say, for me, I've taught emotional intelligence classes for decades. And what I love about that is that we keep learning through research things that maybe we already knew in our DNA wisdom, but the research is kind of proving out these things we already knew. So if we just look at emotional intelligence, some of the latest research shows, we know that our body will get information and messages 2 to 7 seconds before our cognition does, depending on which research study you're looking at. So if we just sat with that alone, it is telling us that our bodies have a wisdom that is beyond our thinking mind, and that we have tended to dismiss or minimize the value of that or the importance of that or the power of that. And so, from a body perspective and emotional intelligence, that's one component. But there's a secondary piece that's more recent research, which actually even says that when we are orienting to decisions from what, we might have traditionally called a gut instinct or intuition or something like that, they're actually more accurate than if we are in cognition alone, right? So for me, when I have taught emotional intelligence, I can teach it, but what matters to me is the body aspect of it, right? So if I were sitting in a meeting and something just doesn't feel right to me, how that shows up really is in my body, right? So what will happen is my heartbeat might increase, or my hands might get sweaty, or I might tense my fingers. Again, I believe every person is their own unique GPS to what's happening around them. But those occurrences happen in my body. It's just that we are in a society that values the head and cognition so much that we tend to forget everything below the neck. And so for me, whether we're talking about emotional intelligence or a sense of enough, it exists in our body. Like there's just tremendous wisdom there. And when I first, the first experience that kicked off this whole snowball avalanche that became the book was I had put some chalk out in front of my house and had just literally written, please write, chalk, or draw, and had made a few colorful circles. I had gone to sit on my porch. I was working on my laptop, and our porch is deep, so you can't see from the sidewalk. And there was a little boy that walked by with their parent, and you could hear him like, please, please, can we stop? And you could hear the parent like very hesitant, like I'm sure they had busy other things to do, but eventually they did. And he was rhythmically kind of speaking, he's talking out loud as kids do, like they self-soothe, right? Oh, a little more blue here, a little this there, et cetera. And so when I knew that there'd been enough time and they had walked away and it was kind of safe to walk down there, I thought, I'll just go check and see what he drew, thinking it would be like a scribble or something that only a parent can appreciate. It's supposed to be a lion, but it looks like a duck, right? And what I saw when I got down there struck me. So I had made these colorful circles. He had turned them into planets. He had put rings around them, like in an accurate 3D kind of way that just stopped me in my tracks. And again, it reminded me of when I first saw pictures of space and realized, wow, this universe is gorgeous artwork. It really is this amazing thing. And so I'd stopped. My body stopped and I teared up. Like I just had tears in my eyes, but the felt sense in my body was there was this sense of something inside me embracing me. It felt like warmth. It felt like a hug. And so that's what I think of as my first experience with the embodied sense of enough. It wasn't some cognitive, oh yes, I will convince myself that I'm enough. I felt it in my body. The tears came down, my heart opened. It felt like a warm embrace. And that's where that's where I met her. Like literally she came into my life, this presence, this experience, this piece of it. And so For me, embodied literally means in the body. It is this experience I'm having here, not reasoning myself into, which again, if we talk about some of these limiting beliefs that you've worked with for years, you can only go so far in the cognition. I mean, it's a lot of what your work has been. If we don't get into the body with these things, there's only so much you can do or move or discover. And so this phase of enough coming into my life, or me having the experience of it, it is not a cognitive idea, it is a felt sense.
I love it. Wow. So incredible how that picture on the sidewalk just allowed you to really have this aha moment. So incredible.
Yeah.
Nothing is a coincidence. Nothing
Nope.
in this world is so cool. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Because it could have been raining and then it would have been washed away. Like, it's just so amazing.
So many things. And I didn't ever expect, that we talk about it as like the sidewalk chalk experience, because I didn't expect, that little thing. I literally had been cleaning out, there's some old sidewalk chalk the kids had. I had an old jar sitting in the garage and I just threw it out there. It was not, in that way intended to be what it became. And again, that I talk about that in the book as well. But what happened on that sidewalk alone kept being a gift that kept on giving, in the sense that, to your point, like the rain would wash things away, but then people would start again. And it's still like it's out front right now because we're in the season, right? But what would happen is I might come out there in the morning and there would be a sweet blessing, have a good Saturday, hearts of two people in love or whatever it was, or pictures, and through that, it's, I say I began to meet my quote unquote neighbors, or the people here, not through their titles or what they did, but through the pictures on their hearts, right? And which were lovely and beautiful, and still to this day are moving. And I had many people that would stop by and, oh, I love that you do this. I mean, it's been years now. We keep going with this tradition, but I'd have people introduce themselves. Oh, I'm the cartoonist that comes, I come by when I'm walking home from work at night, and I'm the one that did this, But what a beautiful way to experience each other, that, to your point, we can call it random, but really,
exactly. I love that.
Sure felt like something bigger,
Yes, I've created 6 pillars of self-care, like very foundational things that need to be there in order to be healthy. Longevity, they could be really pillars of health, of anything, and authentic connection. And that's just such a beautiful way to connect. Such a beautiful way for the people.
Well, and to your point about the authentic, it's like, I'm not leading with what society expects me to. Like when I'm just drawing a picture, putting a saying, it is by nature more authentic, because it's almost like I'm setting aside my rational thinking. I'm back to that kid space where I'm going to pick up chalk and draw a picture.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that authentic connection. That's a beautiful description.
Yes, to yourself and then to others as well. So what is your definition of enough? How do you define enough?
For me, there's almost like a test I can do with myself, so it's a bodily experience where all of a sudden my heart feels more expansive. I feel sufficient. I feel, at peace in my body in that moment. People might be around me doing whatever they're doing, but it doesn't really ruffle my feathers too much. Right. And so it is an embodied sense that way, but it's also, for me, it's a muscle that I exercise now. So I talk in the book about the ladder of comparison, and I have found for myself, when I begin comparing myself, it usually is not in a healthy way. It usually is more problematic. And so what I notice is, let's say, I was, did a presentation, someone did a presentation after me at a conference. And if they got done and I'm comparing like, oh, I liked their PowerPoint, I want to do something like that next time. That's lovely and healthy and a good way of comparing. But if I looked at that and felt jealous, or, oh my God, they're so good, or I'll never be that way, or blah, 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 I get into that kind of mindset. That's the not enough, right? And so the enough definition is as much of stepping away from that not enough when it starts to feel, compulsive and driving and all that kind of thing, to remind myself that's not the game I'm playing. And again, others they can choose that that's the experience that they're having. But for me, enough is to know that right this moment, if I changed nothing, I'm just not only fine, but magnificent, wondrous, a gift to the planet, all that kind of thing. And that is, again, I say it's a muscle to exercise. It's not a constant, steady state. It's something to, when it comes upon me, to delight and savor and hang on to. And when I find myself really being pulled off track, to bring myself back to.
So what are some, because it just sort of reminds me of other, self-help sort of strategies that there are offline that you can do every day as a morning ritual, evening ritual. So we can talk about a little bit about those. But then what happens online in the moment when you're feeling that? For example, maybe it was more envy or jealousy versus constructive, I guess, comparison. Yeah. So what are some tips and strategies that you would recommend?
To that point, so I literally do notice it in my body, right? And in my body and in the emotions in my body. So I always say this, like, if after that moment of comparison, insight, reflection, I am beginning to criticize, maybe I hear that voice in my head, or my heart feels tight, or I feel depressed or down, or any of those kinds of things, like those are my, kind of warning signals that I'm probably not in a healthy space in that way, right? And so the primary thing I do first is just to recognize that that's the voice of not enough, and literally to me, he is a character in my life. Like, yeah, it is interesting. Sorry, guys out there, but it is, we need more of the feminine, divine feminine rising. Our world's a little out of balance, but it is for me, right? It's that analytical, logical, criticizing, measuring kind of voice. And so, but I literally picture that, like, oh, there he goes again. He's saying that, like, and I was talking to somebody earlier today, but I think what that does is it takes this thing that I think of as me, that voice inside my head that I think of as me, and I put it out there so that I understand, wait, this isn't me. This isn't a thoughtful reflection on my day. This is a voice, a character, an entity, and I don't need to pay attention to it. So my first step is always just recognizing it and kind of moving it in its place where it belongs, which is outside of me.
Disassociating with thoughts.
Yeah, it's using dissociation in a healthy way, right? And again, it helps for me to picture him, as a character, like this goofy kind of thing that's always kind of shouting, trying to get my attention. So, that's the first thing I do. And then, the second thing is just to really kind of tune back in with my body. And just even how you kicked us off with that heart math, like that could be one of the tools or one of the ways, right? But it's to breathe, go inside, exist again, and really to say, to almost kind of reintroduce myself to the opposite, which is enough. And I will say things to myself like, okay, remember, that's not the game we're playing. As a reminder, like I literally have this little dialogue inside my head, that's somebody else's measuring stick. That's not yours. Okay, you got off track there a little bit, but what is it, who are you about? What matters to you? So again, I think the dissociating with not enough, and then really reminding myself of where I'm orienting to, like what's my true north and what's my compass. And I do think that that's different for everyone. I think we all get to make our choices about what that is. But for me, it really is, kind of playing this game of, being a light, for myself and for others on the planet. So in whatever way that looks like, reminding myself that that's the job I'm doing, and it has a very different way of measuring it. And, I had the privilege to be a patient volunteer for hospice many years, patient companion. And when you get to do that, their training's magnificent, but it really teaches you to understand that life is finite as we know it in this space. And so to not be afraid of death or dying, but to really go, okay, I wonder how long I have here. I wonder, what are my spaces there? And so I will always do this exercise where I kind of fast forward to the end of days, on this planet, and ask myself, okay, what will have mattered, and will, me having thighs as thin as them matter? Is that really what the main thing is I'm going to take away? Yeah. Or will it be something else? And typically it's, did I increasingly love myself? Did I care about the people under me? Did I try to be kind and live according to my values? Like those are the things that are going to matter at the end of days to me. And so that takes me back to that sense of enough. It just kind of literally gets me out of a game that I didn't intend to play, but sort of got tempted into.
Yeah. And Barbara, thin thighs are not in anymore. We want muscular thighs these days.
We need to tell my daughter that, who's 14. But yes, understood.
Going to that, actually, that's a little segue into my question. How early can we start this work? Do we need to be a certain age? Do you work with women a certain age, or like, can you talk about this to your 14-year-old daughter, or that there has to be some, sort of maturity development going on? Because I mean, these thoughts are with us even when we're that young. So what are your
I think we can talk as early as kids. And what I love is now, I have seen on some social media moms who are doing it beautifully, right? Who are teaching their kids just by example that they're magnificent and wonderful. I saw Pink in concert last year, and, there's a few lovely examples that she has talked about, of just even talking to her daughter when her daughter came home and someone had called her a boy, and, she's not, and didn't feel, just the way she addressed that, right? At that point, she had said something like, okay, look at your mom, do I have short hair? Yes. Do you think I'm beautiful still? Yeah. Like there was just this lovely dialogue that she brought her into an inquiry when she was very young. So I don't think there's a too young age. It's just that how we talk about it might be different, or how we respond to it, right?
Examples we use. Yeah.
Examples we use. And I think, teenage age is a tough one, right? Because it depends. My children sometimes can't wait to talk to me, and other kinds don't want me anywhere in the house. And that's part of their individuating and breaking away. But I do try to talk about my own journey more. And I think that's probably one of the most important things we could do, is to model it, right? So even I've had my daughter catch me when I might use a phrase that's self-critical, about my body or something like that, which is magnificent, right? Because it means there's a discernment there. They're reflecting about it. And so to me, again, depends on the age, the appetite, all that kind of stuff that they have. But I think it's never too young. I think about none of us, I'm a parent, and there's no such thing as a perfect parent. There's no such thing as having the perfect formula. But if we increasingly, as parents, model for ourselves those kinds of ways. I mean, I just had a conversation yesterday with my son as we were driving in the car and talking about, based on my history with food and eating and body and things like that, I just shared more about it. And I said, that was my journey. And so that's why I'm not always the best role model in these things, because of some of the bumps I experienced. And yet, this is what I'm working on, right? So just that vulnerability and sharing and openness, I feel like creates space. It creates space for a different kind of conversation of enough. Like, I don't have to be perfect right now. There's a reason that I don't overly count calories, because that was problematic for me in my youth, And so just to educate through my own almost self-revealing in examples is what I find at this age. I'm guessing, I don't know, because my oldest is 16. I'm guessing as they get older, we'll have more straight conversations like you and I are having about that sense and those beliefs and things.
Yes. Well, that's lovely for sure. And some really good tips for parents that are listening and have these children, and to maybe perhaps back a little bit more for them. And I think also it just establishes such a beautiful relationship if you start early on. There's like that trust, that psychological safety, that they can really rely on you to be honest and be open. So I love that you're doing that. In terms of, I mean, there's a lot of distractions, way more than, and sort of a hustle culture than, let's say, our great grandmothers, or even great grandmothers. I wouldn't go that far back. Do you feel that this sense of enough and self-worth, they didn't have this problem? Or what do you
I think it's always been around. It just took different forms. It showed up slower, I mean, certainly as a teenager, I didn't feel like enough, right? And we didn't have social media. I didn't have a phone in my pocket. I didn't have all those kinds of things. So I do believe it's been around for a long time. I think some of it is systemic, right? How could a woman who had no right to vote feel like enough, right? Like society is telling you, you don't matter as much as this other being, right? And so I think that sense of, not enough has been there for a very long time. I do, and again, I've said this to my kids, I feel for the generation now, because I think it's even harder. And it's even more difficult to discern that, because there is this false sense of people, it's when nobody could alter a Photoshop picture
Yeah, the
when I was a
filters.
kid and post it. And my son actually gave me a brilliant example of this yesterday. And I love that they at least have some self-awareness. He was saying this, this girl had posted a picture and, clearly she had photoshopped her waist to be thinner because it was on some dock and the dock curves in, by accident. It was like not the best Photoshop job.
Oh
But I love
no.
that there's even some reflection to understand that, sometimes what you're seeing is not real. But I empathize with them because I haven't had to grow up in it. And I definitely think it exacerbates. And again, I think our call to that then is to, it's radical then to say, I see you over there. I see you, even as a podcast, like people are, oh, how many downloads do you have? How many of this do you have? Like, you matter if. I matter if, might be a body thing, might be a success thing, might be a
So
money
true.
thing,
Mm.
and so to notice the temptation to, like, again, play that game, but then decline, to literally say, no,
Yeah.
thank you, I'll pass, um, and I think that's the challenge and the opportunity, but I think it's way harder now.
Yeah, yeah. But it's doing the work too, like working with someone like you to discern that and how much is enough for you. Because you're right, it's so individual. It's and also in different stages of your life or seasons of your life might change as well.
Well, and to that point, like one of the metaphors that work for me that I put in the book is this ladder of comparison, right? And the visual is, for those that are listening, like, imagine that you have a ladder that, starts on the earth and goes up almost infinitely into the sky. And in that ladder, you've ranked yourself in the sense of enough. Now, you can't even do it holistically because there'd have to be one for money, one for body, one for whatever. But if this ladder only has a spot for one person on each rung, it doesn't matter where you stand. There's always people above you, unless you're at the very bottom, there's always people below you. And unless you're at the very top, there's always people above you. But if we think about even just from a financial perspective, so we put at the very top of that letter is, a couple, some guys in our world right now who have the most wealth. Even that, with a wind of change, a market change, et cetera, they're off that top spot in a minute. So you never really get to rest on that ladder because there's always more you could be, should be, et cetera, doing. And even the people that are at the top of the money ladder, they don't have the best relationships. So they might be envious of someone else's body or beauty or relationship. And so it becomes a rat race game, right? Where we're looking above us and comparing, or looking below us and feeling superior, right? And so for me, the discipline that I increasingly develop is just catching myself when I'm doing that. And I say there's the only solution is getting off the ladder, literally taking your hands off the rungs and stepping off and, noticing and go, oop, I don't know how I got on there again. Let me cut that out. But the truth is, whole concept is what we're up against in the world in some ways.
Mhm.
Because even if my daughter is the most gorgeous of anyone in her class or her city, she could go online and find someone else who's technically prettier by somebody's standards,
Mm.
So that game itself is problematic. And the only way to quote unquote win is to stop playing it,
Mm.
right? To really lean into the challenging opportunity that maybe just as I am is magnificent, and how radical and wild to think about, right?
Yeah, because it reminds me of the quote that comparison is the killer of joy or something along those
Yes.
lines, right?
Thief of joy. And
Thief
yeah.
of joy,
And
exactly.
that title in my book, I said comparison kills. And I do believe that's true. Again, not a healthy, you know, oh, I play tennis against you and I'm going to watch the tapes to get better. I don't mean that. I call that the little C comparison versus big C comparison. Little C comparisons are, oh, the floor's out of whack there. Let me fix it. But the big C comparison is when we do the comparison and we feel less than about ourselves. I do believe that kills. It kills dreams, hopes, perspective. And again, you work in the body field. I notice for myself, and again, I'm not immune. There was a moment this weekend that I don't even know I don't even know what the thought was it led, but all of a sudden I was like depressed in my body for a moment. And that then makes me want to eat junk food and lay on the
Mhm.
couch. And it makes me
So
want to not move. It makes me feel like I don't get deserved to show up to my life, right? There's a whole cycle that happens out of that is really damaging. And so, to be able to interrupt that flow, that process, and make a little intervention for ourselves, I think is really essential.
Yes. And you do that. How do you interrupt that pattern? Is it that little
Noticing.
self-talk? Okay. The
Yeah,
noticing,
noticing
the
again, it would be
awareness.
the same thing like, here I am again, like you're catching yourself and then
Yeah.
going back to, okay, wait, what is the game I'm playing? What is my value set? What are those things? And generally that will do it for me. Again, might take some time. And I feel like I have a whole tool belt around me. So if that doesn't work, I call a friend. If that doesn't work, I
I
go
love
in
that.
nature. If that doesn't work, I breathe. Like I think we never know what's going to kind of take care of it, but our description of self-care is so limiting. There's so many things that could fall on that list. And to be willing to have all of them in our bucket to get ourselves back to that space of enoughness.
Yeah, and you're right, Barbara. It's a practice,
Yeah.
a ritual, whatever it is, that allows you to, when you need it, to just it automatically will come to you, right? And it's the first step is the awareness piece, so the recognizing it.
Well, and there's so much research on the power of gratitude, right? And not in the sense of, oh, I'm so lucky for my life, even though that's important, but to really, again, we started this discussion with that heart-centeredness. So, what I believe is as we focus on that, anything that I can be thankful for. Oh gosh, right now I'm in a house that feels safe with four walls and I'm protected, from things that happen, et cetera. As I think about those things, my heart expands, relaxes, gets in rhythm, does all its thing. Well, that makes a difference, right? And so even things like, starting the day, ending the day with gratitudes, which a lot of people talk about, it's because it probably brings our heart into coherence.
Yeah, totally. I love it. And I forgot to mention when you were talking about the embodied, the Heart Math Institute, they've been around for over 30 years, and the research it shows that there's actually more signals going from the heart to the brain than the other way
Yep.
around. So it's really feeling that embodiment and feeling that gratitude in your heart.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. And talking about tools,
Mhm.
boundaries. How can we
Mm,
create beautiful boundaries? We talk a lot about that on this podcast, but let
yeah.
me you talk about the nose and the nose, the small nose and the big nose. So
Yeah.
let's unpack that.
Well, I think for me, it was the experience I began to have as I increasingly leaned into a sense of enough for myself. So when I do that and when I really realize there's nothing I need to change, I can choose to change anything, but there's nothing I need to in order to be okay. That sense of enough is right here. The more I got into those spaces, I think the more I began to value the treasure that I am, that we are, that all of us are. And so in that, I got, more selfish about where I spend my life force, where I spend my energy, where I spend my resources. And again, there are loads of books on boundaries. And what I said in mine is I had gotten good earlier in my life at the big no's. And so the big no's are when somebody really does a boundary violation for you, when they do something ethically, morally that kind of outrages you, that I got strong enough to step in those moments. But what I didn't have a lot of muscle in were the small no's, so somebody asking me, hey, I've got a ticket to a fundraiser. Do you want to go with me? And the truth is, I don't want to go, but I would say yes because I'm not busy and they offered, right? And that's a very limited perspective if I'm taking care of this precious resource called me. If I'm taking care of it, then instead I go inside, I close my eyes, I tune into my body, and I sense, gosh, does that feel right for me? Does that feel right for me now? Is that the right decision for me to make? If it is, then fine, feel free. But if it's not, then giving the small no. And the small no is, in that particular example, thanks so much, but no, or no, not a fit for me, but I so appreciate that you offered. Right. Those were the harder no's, these really small no's. And what I realized was if we're not conscious of those small no's, our life all of a sudden becomes filled with the small yeses. Oh, can you store this? I know you have a big attic. Can you put that up there? Sure. Like I have no reason, quote unquote, to say no, even if it doesn't feel right to me. And that's where, again, I'm always kind of tuning into the body. If my body doesn't feel like it's a yes, then it is a no. And so, how do I be gracious, but still be clear about that small no boundary? And it's fascinating as you begin to do that because I had some people get kind of outraged with me that I wouldn't have even expected. Somebody might say, well, why do you have a conflict? You know, and I, at the beginning I was like, oh, I don't have an answer to that, and my answer is no, it's just not a fit for me. Right. Nope. Just doesn't work for me. Nope. Just not, how I intend to spend my weekend. No, so practicing that muscle that I don't need a reason. I don't need an explanation. I don't need anything for that small no. So I say beautiful boundaries, zero apologies. But again, I think we put each other in those positions sometimes by asking those follow-on questions that don't really serve, right? And so it might be something like that, over and over again, that as we develop the muscle of it, it becomes clearer for us. But in another one, I had, an experience where somebody wanted me to help with something, and I had been on the road. I was tired. I was exhausted. It didn't make sense, but I always had said yes. And so I said, again, thanks so much, because that's genuine for me. I love that you thought of me, but it's not going to be a fit for me. And this person was furious, like all of a sudden, like, well, you're not a friend, you don't blah, 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 blah. Like they had this whole agenda going. And what was interesting as I reflected more on it later, I thought, in the, work that we do in, personal development, things like that, I think she hadn't learned to draw boundaries, and it was really uncomfortable for her to watch me do one, because at first I had the reaction like, oh gosh, did I do something wrong? And I went back, replayed the conversation. I'm like, no, I was gracious. I was lovely. I was clear. I just happened to have it not be a fit for me. And what I have found is that as I do those small no's, there are spaces that I hadn't anticipate for so much more that is a good use of my life force. And sometimes that is going for a walk. Sometimes that is spacing out. Sometimes that is self-reflecting. It could be anything. Sometimes it's, spending time with, one of my kids, whatever it is. But by practicing those small no's, there's so much more room that opens up, again, in our houses and our calendars, all the things.
For sure, making room for something else, right? Which brings me to my question about becoming bulletproof. Having that bulletproof grace for these toxic people, because sometimes maybe that conversation allowed you to realize, hey, wait a minute, I don't actually want to be around someone like that. So there's always a silver lining again.
Yeah. And the bulletproof grace, this is something that's come into a lot of coaching sessions with executives, where oftentimes we're in situations that are very challenging, right? And if I'll just give a workplace example, maybe most of the time I just assume everybody is trying to do their best when we're sometimes wonky, but that's my assumption, right? But every now and then you might have this experience where they're really not, and they're not, and you might be even in a group setting or something like that, and somebody, attacks in some way that looks not like an attack, but it really is, and you feel it in your body. And so I have given myself permission for this bulletproof grace. And so the visualization I have in my mind is I'm literally wearing, a metal chest plate, but it's stunning. Of course, it's gorgeous. It's feminine. It has all the curves, but it is, nothing can get through there. It's bulletproof. So I can almost watch that attack coming, and then I can visualize that bounces off, and I can still respond with grace, but more strategically, right? So let's say somebody, says something to me in a group setting that looks like a question, but it's actually a criticism. I instead of getting into their question or defending myself, I could say, I'm curious, what led you to ask that question? So all of a sudden I've turned the tables, right? I'm being gracious. I'm still following my own value set. I'm not attacking back, but I am not allowing their attack to enter my space either. Right.
Yeah.
And I find in company settings, this is really essential, because oftentimes those toxic personality styles, the narcissists, all that kind of stuff, they want to get a rise out of you.
Yes.
I don't even know if they're conscious of it, but it's part of where they get their, kind of twisted enjoyment. Yes, it's their hit. And so in my early days, I would be so proud of myself that I'd yell, argue, this, that, as if that was progress. And then I realized, wait, they're winning still.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what I said. What they wanted was to wrestle in the mud. I never wanted to wrestle. And so instead I might say, and I've had this, like somebody's saying something that's verbally abusive, that's, in a professional setting, I can now just pause and say, you know what, I'm going to hang up now. When you've had a moment to kind of regroup, and feel like you're in a place to have a more professional discussion, happy to talk, and I can hang up, right? So that is still a gracious response. But I used to think if they were yelling at me, I'd have to yell back in kind. But instead, it's literally like, nope, I see your bullet coming. I see you tempting me into the space. No, bullet bounces off, and I can still have a lovely response. And I would say to people often, years ago, my dad had to do a deposition, and in a deposition, you get coached on your responses. And I don't know if it's still this way as today, but in the one that he was in, they would videotape it legally, or not videotape it, audio tape it legally. But the only thing that got submitted was the transcript. And so he was coached that somebody can ask you a question. You don't need to answer right away. You can pause for 10 minutes before you answer that question, because the transcript itself won't show the pause. It doesn't show that length. Again, I don't know if that's changed, but I think of that with my bulletproof grace. I think if somebody were transcribing the interaction I'm having right now, if they were going to go tell on me to somebody and what a jerk I was, and they did my verbatim words, all they would find would be grace and my values. So that's all they'd see in there. But what's actually happening is I took care of myself, I protected myself, and I let them feel, their discomfort. I put it back on them, right? And so really holding that I don't have to be a jerk, even if jerkiness has come at me. I can say, it looks like you're having a difficult time. This isn't a fit for me. Happy to talk later, blah, blah, whatever's true. But I just literally don't need to engage with that temptation of the bullet they're throwing at me.
I love that. And that's part of doing the work, right? Because I often mention that your blood pressure is going to go up. Theirs is probably it isn't, right? So kind of going back to yourself and taking care of yourself, and then taking that time. I love it. You visualize the bulletproof vest. I visualize more of like dodging that bullet.
Matrix, I love that. Matrix style. That's great. I love that. That's fantastic.
That is such a cool tip. I love it. Thank you for that. I do have a question, and maybe I'm not sure where it's going. You said that everyone's definition of enough is very individual, and it's more of an embodied experience. It's, maybe, I don't know, like in terms of, there's kind of, in my opinion, like a fine line now that we're talking a little bit more deeper about getting out of your comfort zone and wanting more, and then sort of feeling enough. How do you discern between?
Here's what's been so interesting for me in my own experience is, there are a lot of people, when we were talking about this concept originally, that were like, well, then won't you just kind of sit on the couch and do nothing and blah, 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 blah. I have had the polar opposite experience, right? So I wrote this book. As I was writing it, I ended up writing and performing a one-woman show. Okay. I had no intent to do that. That wasn't the plan. That was not anything. But when I understand that I'm enough just as I am, I don't need some degree to do that. I don't need anybody's permission. I don't need anything. And so my experience was quite the opposite. I have done more in the last 3 years that feels outrageous to me in taking risks and living life and doing things because there's nothing to lose. The part of me that it feels like not enough is the one that's measuring based on somebody else's standards. And so I'm frozen, right? And I'll give you a good body example for me, because again, weight has always been a thing for my life and all that kind of stuff. Well, as I give myself permission that like, this is all glorious as it is, guess what? Then I get to dance. I get to put on music, look ridiculous, and move any way I want, because there's nothing to stop me from doing that. When I'm comparing myself to somebody else, well, then I'm not going to go to the gym because I'm going to look stupid, or because I'm going to compare myself to if they can follow the Zumba better than I can, right? There's all these prohibitions that come in when we're in that not enough state. When we're in that state of enough, it's literally like an unleashed world of possibilities, because no matter what my choices are, I'm fine, right? So again, I don't know what other people's experiences have been and will be, but every time that I lean into enough, I do more, not less. It's just more that's guided by my insights, guided by what matters to me, guided by my values, guided by the things that bring me delight and joy. And so, I will say things like, I don't have to change. So I don't, quote unquote, have to lose weight. But guess what? When I don't have to, I can. Oh my gosh, I can in 10 million ways. I can explore food. I can discover it. I get to delight in it. I don't have to live in that other place where there was a right way, an only way, a wrong way. Like that not enough space was limiting my options to enjoy my body, to enjoy my life, to try foods I wouldn't have eaten, because I would have defined myself, well, I don't do that. Only this kind of person does that, right? We limit and narrow our aperture when we're in the not enough space. So it's truly, to me, hasn't been a problem, because if anything, I've done more that's aligned with my, highest, best purpose and self as I lean into enough.
Wow, beautiful. So what tip would you give a listener, and then a woman listening, and it's really resonating with her, and she really wants to find that embodiment, that peace? What would you tell her?
Well,
what would be the next step that she can do?
Yeah. And I would say there's a couple things. So the first thing is what we talked about as far as putting not enough outside there and noticing, like, separate the thought from you, separate what that is compared to thinking it. Like, don't give it credence, don't give it any meaning, just notice it. And honestly, laughter, like if you can laugh hilariously, that's why I say not enough is a character to me. In the book, he kept getting, more and more outrageous. He's like a court jester that, can barely hold his own. And so I just don't take it that seriously. I just notice it. So that's like always my first thing to do. Then I will try to move myself into the space of enoughness, like we talked about with, kind of pulling out one of those tools. But I would say, a tip beyond that is, sort of describing what your game is, right? So for me, what that game that not enough in comparison were inviting me to were society's definition, somebody else's rules, et cetera. And so to really decide, like, what is my game? Well, my game is I would choose to hold life as a wonderful playground, as a great adventure where I get to learn, grow, explore, try some things, birth some things, write a book, do a show, do whatever. I just get to do all of that. And so when I define that game, then I use that as my GPS, right? So when I catch myself in these other spaces of the not enough, it allows me to go back and go, wait, what am I about really again? Well, I'm just here exploring. So maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I threw up on myself in a conference call. All right, well, that doesn't matter in my game. In my game, we just had an experience. Cool. Anything to learn from it? Anything to discover, right? It just takes the pressure off. But I think doing any one or all of these steps, what it really does is create space for us. It creates space in our life to be okay as we are, to do outrageous things, to navigate our life in a way that feels resonant and authentic and true, no matter what anybody else thinks and says. Mm-hmm. And again, I think, because of that authenticity research, I think when we do that, that's what's authentic, and that's where I say your definition and my definition of enough might be different. They might look different. What matters is that rings true for us. What matters is that Rita's doing Rita as fully as Rita feels like, and Barbara's doing Barbara as fully as Barbara feels like. And that's wonderful, and I think any one of those steps helps create enough space to invite that opportunity.
Yeah. Mic drop, Barbara. That's so good. So good. Thank you. So inspiring. I'm just like, wow, this is so amazing. Everything that really resonates with me, what you're saying and what this podcast is all about.
Well, I was going to say in understanding more and more about what your work is and what you do, really, that's what you help people do, experience that, right?
Mm-hmm.
With, the 6 pillars or the different places, it's like you're really helping people have a roadmap to that sense in a different way. And I think that's just really quite extraordinary and beautiful.
That's what keeps me going. And I love it. So what is the best advice you've ever been given?
Wow. I would have to say, I'm picking between multiple at the moment, but I think the one that I think of, it's a little different than particular advice, but it was a quote by Margaret Heffernan, who is, she has supported a lot of women entrepreneurs. She's a serial entrepreneur herself. She's written, a book called Women on Top. Her last book is, I think, called Uncharted. She might have written another one since then. But she was being interviewed. She had received some award. And one of the reflections that she had was, she had realized, she said, I realized that all this time it had been playing a man's game, so she was playing another game. And she said, what I realized in that moment is I hadn't decided what my own was, right? And so I think the advice that I took out of that was decide what your own game is, which leads to some of these things we're talking about, really. But I feel like in that quote, she gave me permission to play my own game.
Love that. Wow. I'm going to check her out, actually, because then that builds that discernment and that compass that you can guide your life through. Amazing. Yeah. So what is the most influential book? Is it one of hers?
Well, it's tough because I love to read and immerse and all the things. And so at any point in time, it could be a variety, but there's a couple that are on my shelf that fall more into kind of the spirituality space of it, because that is something that I've always been a seeker, always matters to me. But I would say that the most influential one to me was probably Autobiography of a Yogi, because it's Paramahansa Yogananda. And part of the piece of it, I mean, I love all faiths and things like that, but what that book introduced me to is a different framework and model of looking at the world. Like there's all these things that we think this is how it is, right? That we're raised with. This is exactly how something is. But as we are introduced to a different way, like, well, no, that's actually not how it is. This is, he talks about his experiences that he had over his lifetime. And again, he did live here in the United States, but at the same time, he's having these very esoteric metaphysical experiences with his, guru that had passed and things like that. And so I think it really gave me opportunities to see things from a different viewpoint.
I love that curiosity and expansion of what you know. So what are your top 3 non-negotiable self-care habits? I'm so sorry, Barbara.
That's okay. That was so strange. Was that you or me?
No, that was me, because they're doing construction outside. And so I'm actually on a hotspot now, and I should have known because it happened again this morning too. So I should have known. I'm so sorry. Good. Do we want to start with, okay, I will ask a question about the top 3. We're like nearly there. Just can't.
That's great.
Like literally a couple minutes.
We'll do a quick cut there. It's just fine.
Yes. So 3, 2.
Are you recording?
Yes. I don't know how it got into recording mode over.
That's okay. Just making sure.
Thank you. So what are your top 3 non-negotiable self-care habits, Barbara?
I think the one is kind talk. So I will notice myself having some negative talk, et cetera, and it's, pretty much like unacceptable. And then I, switch into kinder talk. I have developed a routine for waking up and going to bed. And again, from that perspective, it's some of what we've talked about, where I will, if it's at the bedtime, I will close my eyes, I go to my heart space, I invite in, angels, guides, et cetera, and I set an intention for, my evening. And if it's the morning, because I'll catch myself starting to go into some cognition places, I pause and I use that opportunity to almost kind of pre-plan my day in the sense of energy, not in a plan place. But I will say, okay, today's going to be magnificent. What would I like? What would I feel? Is there anything I want to send forward into my day? So kind of those, wake up and bedtime rituals. And then the other one, which is a little bit more from a network perspective, is I have a group of women, and we get together every 3 to 4 months. And it is, again, a non-negotiable, because it is the deepest place where I remember who I am and that I matter. And so sometimes that shows up in a trip together, and sometimes it shows up in a dinner together. It can show up in a lot of different ways, but I've gotten to the point where I don't care what else is going on. I will be present for that.
That's so beautiful. I love that. That's really nice. Thank you. And so, where can people find you? Where's the best place to connect and obviously buy your book?
Yeah. Well, the book's available on barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com. And if people want to, get a little, I have a little weekly reminder about enough. They can go to beenough.com, which is available on my website. And if it's something more, interested in coaching, consulting, some of those things, it's corluma.com, corluma.com. So any or all of those places.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I'll put that in the show notes as well. So it's clearly spelled out there too. Thank you, Barbara. It's been a delightful conversation. I am so, so grateful that our paths have crossed and we've had this amazing conversation. And I just want to thank you for doing the work that you're doing and writing this amazing book, and can't wait to stay in touch and stay connected.
Thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing that feels like fuel to the things I'm doing in such a mutual way. So I appreciate the privilege and the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Have a beautiful rest of the day.
You too.
Thank you for tuning in to the Self-Care Goddess podcast. If today's episode inspired you, share it with another woman who's ready to reclaim her vitality and lead from within. To continue your journey, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and connect with me on ritasavoya.com. Until next time, remember, self-care isn't selfish, it's your superpower. Take a deep breath in, exhale, and keep rising. Ciao for now.